As you all know, we began our summer series by looking at the war within. We talked about temptation, the flesh, the devil, the world, and all those things that we face as believers. And we said we face spiritual battles, and we took an in-depth look at that over about 5 or 6 weeks. And now, in the remainder of our summer series, we are going to look at specific spiritual battles that we face. And we know that we have victory in Christ. And today we are going to begin the, quote, second part of the summer series, and we've entitled it The Battle Plan for Victory. And today we're going to be kicking this off by talking about victory over my fear. Fear. Fear is a powerful component. It's a powerful enemy that Satan uses against us, and we need to understand it. And we all face spiritual struggles. And so over the next 10, 12 weeks, we will look at these different spiritual struggles we are facing. But specifically today, we're going to talk about fear. Now, Elijah is the text out of the Old Testament that I have chosen to help us launch this part of our series. Elijah was an incredible man of God, man of faith, man of power, man of the hour that God used in such a powerful way, but yet he was conquered by fear. He dealt specifically with fear, anxiety, and depression. Do those terms resonate with you personally? You know, those terms are very popular terms in our culture today. Fear, anxiety, depression. Do you hear anybody talking about that they have anxiety or depression or they deal with fear? There are so many. In fact, it is such a current reality. Many books have been written by people who are lost and people who are saved to deal with anxiety and depression in our culture today. And for the believer, we must understand this from the spiritual aspects of what we are facing and how we view those things in relation to who God is and what God has for us. And so it is my prayer, it is my hope over the next several weeks that God will bring victory to you if you are facing some type of fear, anxiety, or depression. I've faced all of this. And you say, well, I'm doing great. Well, great. But your day is coming more than likely. We all face it at some point in time in our life, and these are spiritual truths that we need. Now, Elijah's story is very different than ours. We do not have Elijah's story. But may I say this to you, that the spiritual principles that we will learn from Elijah, they apply across the board in every one of our lives. And so today I want to share with you from the first 5 verses. It's actually the verse 5a. It's not the full verse, but 4.5 verses about Elijah's spiritual battle. I want to share 5 aspects that can be brought out that can begin to help us understand how to have victory over our fears. So let me bring the first one out of verse 1 and 2, and it's simply this. We will see the aspect of the death threat that Elijah received. And I'll give you some background if you're not familiar with the story as we look at this first point so you can understand the significance of what's going on. But verse 1 says this. Now, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, may the gods, that is little g, she didn't believe in the one true living God, but a bunch of little gods, false gods, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. That was the letter she wrote. It was a death threat. And so we're going to talk about this death threat. It is a spiritual battle for Elijah. This is a spiritual battle following one of the more there's a lot of incredible victories in the Bible, but this is right at the top. It is such an amazing spiritual victory that Elijah had experienced where God moved in and did something only God could do. And now this spiritual battle. It is the battle that follows victory. And I've faced this many times. This is not a fantasy. This is real. This happens. It's happened to many people in the Bible. It's happened to me. Maybe it's happened to you. I don't know. But let me give you some background about the spiritual victory that then brought this spiritual battle into Elijah's life. See, Elijah was the man that God chose to work through in such a powerful way. He was working through Elijah to call out the false prophets of Baal and the prophets of the Asherah pole, but specifically those prophets of Baal. There were 450 of those false prophets. And God's people were divided. Did we believe in the Baals or did we believe in the living God? And they were trying to straddle the fence. They were trying to have both, and they could not. And God sent Elijah to call their hearts out and call their hearts back to Him. And there was an experience on Mount Carmel. And it was a great move of God where all the 450 prophets gathered. And Elijah said, gather them up, and we're going to see who is real and who is false. They made an altar, and they put a sacrifice on the altar. And it was to say, hey, the real God will call down fire, fire will come down and consume the sacrifice. And so the Baal prophets, they did all they could do to call down their false gods to consume, and nothing happened. They cried out, they called out, they cut themselves, they danced around, they did everything they could, and there was nothing. And Elijah said, hey, maybe your gods are asleep. You need to wake them up. Maybe they're busy. And he began to taunt them. But they could not produce any result to say their gods were real. And then Elijah said, build the altar. Put the sacrifice on it. He said, now go get some water and pour some water on it 3 times to the point there was a little ditch dug around it that even filled up with water. And he prayed and he said, oh God, basically, show your people that you are real and consume this sacrifice. Not only was the sacrifice consumed, but the altar was consumed. The water that was in the trench that was dug consumed. God came down and consumed everything. And the people fell on their faces and they said, oh God, you are real. You, oh God, are real. The Lord, He is God. That's exactly what they said. Elijah said, take these false prophets and get rid of them. And they took them and they took their lives. And Ahab, the king, was like, what in the world? Elijah said, look, God is God. Ahab drags himself home in his usual fashion. He begins to despair before his wife, Jezebel. And she began to listen to him to solve his problems like she usually did. Elijah told her everything. He killed all the prophets with the sword. He did all, he told the whole thing. And Jezebel, without hesitation, she didn't blink an eye. She didn't shed a tear. She had no emotion. She simply said, write a letter. Deliver it to Elijah. I will handle this problem. She'd had enough, and she was going to handle Elijah. Now, don't forget, her reputation preceded her. She was a woman of action. She was not idle in her threats. If she said she was going to do something, she would do something, and she gave her word. And the letter was written, and the letter was delivered, and Elijah received the letter. And so this is the background to all that we're looking at. It's a fascinating story. It's such an interesting look into the personal life of Elijah, was such an incredible man of faith. I mean, God used him in such a powerful way. But yet he experiences this fear. He goes from this high on Mount Carmel of seeing God consume everything and all the Baal prophets being wiped out to reading a little letter that caused him to fear. It was a spiritual battle. You know, you solve one problem and another arises, right? Well, this is where Elijah was. He was at the pinnacle He had in his mind what God was going to do and what God's people were going to do, that they were going to turn back to God and everything was going to be fine, and all of a sudden everything was going to be okay. But it didn't really work that way. Life doesn't really work that way. In a sense, it was a type of false summit, spiritually speaking, for Elijah. Now, in the physical world, maybe you've experienced this. Let me explain a little and give you a little story so maybe you can kind of connect with this. We went through a season a couple of years ago. I don't know, it might have been 2.5, 3 years ago. I don't remember what it was. But I walked in one day and Michelle said, "Mark, the microwave is broken." I said, "It is?" She goes, "Yeah, it's broken." So I took that thing out, figured out how to fix it, and we looked at maybe buying a new one or fixing it. Anyway, fixed it, put it back in. A couple weeks later, I walked in and she said, "Mark, the oven's broken." I said, "The oven's broken?" "Yeah, the oven's broken. We had to fix the oven." And then I came in another day and she said, "Hey, Mark, guess what? The dishwasher's broken." I said, "The dishwasher's broken?" "Yeah." And then in that mix somewhere, the washing machine broke. And I mean, every time I thought I was hitting a plateau, something else broke. You ever felt like that in life? You just feel like you can never get ahead? I'm telling you, Elijah, spiritually speaking, thought he was going to have all the appliances fixed in the house. But it didn't work like that. What happened was, it wasn't just victory and everything was great. It was victory and then the spiritual battle of a death threat coming to him. It was a combination of things. And there was something that was going on inside of him that led to this fear, and we'll talk about it. But the way life works, and I've found this to be true, we cannot live off past victories. We can celebrate them and we can see and say, "Look where God worked." We can raise up stones and we can say we shall never forget how God worked. But we can't live in the past. We've got to live currently, depending on God every day. At least our flesh takes over. At least the enemy comes and whispers in our ear and he says, "God is dead. God can't do anything." Or guess what? Here's a little letter. I'm about to take your life. God had protected Elijah all along. Did God stop protecting him? No. Not at all. But something happened for Elijah. See, when he separated from God in his heart and his mind, that's when his problems began. And this little letter was such a problem. Yes, Jezebel was wicked. Yes, Jezebel was a woman of action. But Jezebel was not greater than God. But at this moment, something for Elijah in his heart and mind, this letter from Jezebel superseded what Elijah knew about God. Now don't miss that. Because when you and I get into fear about something, there is a shift where we place it above Almighty Creator, all-knowing God, omniscient God. All that He is. And we say, well, this situation, this person, this feeling, I'm going to let it supersede who God is in my life. And it's a problem. I've done it myself. And maybe you have as well. Watch what takes place. The letter is delivered, and now we're going to see the second aspect of the spiritual battle in Elijah's life, and it's simply this: the fear within. Verse 3 says this, just the first 3 words: Elijah was afraid. This is not fear like he's almost stepped on a snake. No, this is fear for his life. Elijah had experienced God's consuming fire on Mount Carmel. What an experience. I've been to Mount Carmel. What a beautiful place that is. And what a beautiful and powerful experience that had to have been for God to answer with fire and consume, and the people bow down and say, He is God. Oh man, it was amazing. The consuming fire on Mount Carmel. But here, he is experiencing his own, not a consuming fire of God, but the consuming fear in his heart. He went from fire to fear. I think he thought that God's people would turn. There would be a plateau. There would be a victory. That all of the spiritual battles would be over, but it wasn't the case. He had a deflated expectation. I've had these before where I've seen God work in people's lives in a service, and I was celebrating and thanking God for the movement in the hearts of the people, and somebody will walk out with a negative comment and just throw water on that excitement in essence, right? Have you ever experienced that? It's just the enemy. I'm telling you what it is. It's the enemy coming and saying, you know, you're celebrating a great victory, but guess what? And the devil just tries to discourage you. Because see, the devil hates the victories of God in people's hearts. He hates it. And that's what's going on here. And the shift for Elijah occurred when he went from focusing on God to focusing on Jezebel. That's how the fear happened. He read the letter, he received it, and he read it, and he believed it over who God is. Which raises this question that you and I should ask, and it's simply this. What are you reading? What are you believing that you have placed above God? What is it? Are you believing that something that somebody else has said about you? Are you your own worst enemy? And you mope around and you say, well, I don't have any purpose and I can't do anything. And I've always been a failure my whole life and I don't know what to do. And, you know, and you're just self-defeating yourself all the time within your heart and in your mind. And you think back to 10 years ago where someone said, oh, you'll never be a success or whatever. I don't know. People have all kinds of things that rattle around their hearts and their minds. And the question is, are you living by those things and placing them above what God says about you? Do you know who you are in Christ? Do you know that God has a plan for you? Do you believe that what He began in you, He will complete? Do you believe that you can be an instrument of God's work in this world for His glory? See, if Satan can pull you away and say, no, you're nothing, and you can't be used, and or you're not worthy, and because of this, you can't, that's how he defeats us all the time. Our letter may not come from Jezebel, but it may come from someone around us. It may come from us ourselves. And it's the little letter that we take and we place above what God, who God is and what God has said to us about who we are in Him, that we allow to defeat us with fear. What input is impacting us that's causing the fear? You got to ask this question. Even if you're struggling, you go to a counselor, you go to someone that's trying to help you, you've got to define, where's the fear coming from? Elijah was such an incredible man of faith. The Bible talks about it. Over in James chapter 5, talks about how he was a man just like us, but he had incredible faith, and God used him. He prayed it would not rain, and it did not rain. What an example he is of strong faith. But here we see that he has this strong, consuming fear. I think the message from Jezebel was a trigger point for Elijah. Out of all the people who could have handled that letter, you would have thought it was Elijah. But he didn't. He's described as a righteous man, a powerful man. But do not forget, he is a human man. Sometimes we easily forget this. We place people on pedestals, but yet people are human and they struggle. Great people of faith have struggled and they are human. And when we put them on pedestals and we make them something they're not, or we expect them to be God, it's not fair, nor is it wise. It would be not wise to think that Elijah can't make a mistake. He can. That he can't slip into believing fear over faith. He did. And we must note this. And even in ourselves, we think we're secure and we have this great walk with God. But what happens in our humanity if something comes along and it's a trigger point and we place it above God? Now we're in trouble. Know yourself. We're human. Circumstances have built up. And I don't think we completely grasp what Elijah was seeing, what he was feeling, what he was processing. And I think this is how it is. It's hard to grasp another person's process or what their trigger point is. I can't fully understand what it is that causes fear in you, and you can't fully understand what causes fear in me. But if we'll simply say we are susceptible of fear, if we're not surrendered to God, that's where we all must start. His great faith inspires me, but his great fear teaches me. Fear causes us to despair and become discouraged. Fear can cause you to desert your calling. A lot of people sit at home even today, and God loves them, but he wants them to reconnect within the body of Christ, the church God has given. Somewhere fear took over, and some hurt occurred, and they separated. You know, fear will cause you to separate from God's very best. Fear paralyzes. Fear creates doubt. Fear fosters negativity. Fear kills vision. Fear annihilates purpose. Fear is a cancer to faith. We are called to live by faith, not by fear. And there is this constant battle that takes place. And Satan loves it when he writes his little letter and he gets us up in fear. And we place it above God. You know, Jesus in the New Testament often rebuked his disciples, and it was associated with their lack of faith in conjunction with their spirit of fear. He would say to them often, "Oh, you have little faith. Oh, you have little faith." Whether they were out on the boat in the storm, or whether they were trying to figure out what he was talking about when he said, "Feed the 4,000 and the 5,000," and whatever the situation was, it was, "Oh, you have little faith." Faith and fear will never be friends. Would you top your cheesecake with sardines? No way. But why do we combine faith and fear and think it's okay? Jesus said to his disciples, "No. I hear what you're saying in your words, but I see what you're believing in your heart. You say you're calling on me in the midst of the storm, but you're not really believing in me." And that's why they were so amazed when he spoke to the waters and the wave and the winds, and they stopped and they said, "Even the wind and the waves obey him." And now they're just wow. Sometimes we say the right things, but we don't believe the right things in our hearts. But you can't mix fear and faith together. Our faith is often little when we see Jesus as little. Our faith is little when we see Jesus as limited. Our faith is little when our fears are greater than our faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus can do. You know what's so interesting to me about Elijah? He comes to this point, and I've been there. I understand exactly from my experience and my situations. Now, I've never had his experience and situation, but I understand in essence what he's talking about when he got to the point and he said, "I'm done. I can't do anymore." But the problem was, it was I can't do it anymore. It's not what God could do. God can do all things. Elijah said, "I'm done. I can't do anything else." But there's always the portion of the equation we leave out when fear takes over. We forget, but God, what God does. Faith has sight. Faith has the ability to see and trust what only God can do. And it brings in us a perseverance to live the Christian life, to run the race marked out for us. Perseverance is a sign of spiritual maturity and trusting God. It's directly connected to our faith. You cannot separate faith and perseverance. They go together. They accomplish what only God can do as we trust him. But the fear within is real. Which one will it be? Fear or faith? At this point in Elijah's life, it's going to be fear. And he holds on to the fear, and he loses his faith in God. And here's the next aspect of his spiritual battle: the decision to run. So it said Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. You want to know what kind of running this is? This is fear-based running. He's no longer depending on God how to take his next steps, where to go, what to do. Watch God provide for him as he had done in the past. Let God direct him. He's not getting any direction from God at all. He's simply saying, Let's get out of here. And he's running based on fear. But what's interesting is fear-based running leads to further confrontation with God. Ask Jonah about it. Ask Elijah about it right here. You can run as far as you want, thinking you're going to get away from God. But God in His love and His providence, He still engages us over why we are running. Whatever we fear, guess what? It's going to follow you. Wherever you go, however fast you run, it's still going to be there. You know, sometimes I'll go out and just go for a run to get perspective, maybe relieve some stress. But I've always found this to be true. When I get back from the run and I walk in the door, would be true for any of us. The bills are still on the counter. The emails still have to be answered. The grass still has to be cut. Reality has to be faced, right? Just because you run away doesn't remove reality with God. We still have to face God. We can't run from our problems. They'll follow us wherever we go. A change of scenery doesn't produce a change of heart. I like what Tom Lowry has often said. He said, a flight on a plane will not make you a missionary. And how true that is. Just because you say, well, I'm going to raise the money and go, doesn't mean your heart's right. And just because you run doesn't mean your problems will go away. New people will not change your need to depend on God. God simply wants us to cling to Him and trust Him wherever we are. Running, you can conclude this, running never solves our problems in relationship to what God is doing in our lives. The fourth thing I want you to see about his spiritual battle is this. Now, we have seen the battle, the death threat, the fear within, the decision to run, but now the intentional withdrawal. It says, when he came to Beersheba and Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. You may think that's just kind of a glancing point. It's not. This is very significant. He is making an intentional withdrawal. He is going to separate so that he can isolate, which becomes the recipe for serious depression setting in. To withdraw within while disconnecting from God and others is super dangerous. Don't leave yourself alone with your fears and your thoughts and your despair. It will lead to absolute hopelessness. You take God out of the equation, we're all in trouble. We're all hopeless. And that's what Elijah's doing, even though he's experienced God Almighty in a way like some people never have, never will. He is separating intentionally, which is an indicator of depression setting in. He's not just unplugging. There's nothing wrong with unplugging. Let me tell you something he's doing. He is disconnecting. And there is a difference. It's okay to rest, but it's not okay to run. It's okay to renew, but it's not okay to retreat and give up. It's called running from a reality. Here's the thing. Elijah had zero intentions of returning. None. I mean none. His servant, that poor servant, I don't know what he thought. He thought, he's never coming. My wife waits on me for things and she thinks he is never coming. But I do come. But that servant, I promise you, he got to the point, he said, man, Elijah is never coming back. I thought he was going to come back. No, he's not coming back. Elijah never intended on coming back. And we know this to be true when we look at the fifth aspect, which is the prayer of defeat that he voices to God. It says he came to a broom tree. This is point number 5, the second part of verse 4 into the first part of verse 5. And he said, he came to a broom tree. He sat down under it. Now, a broom tree is it's kind of a shrub kind of type thing that grows in the desert, and it kind of grows out like this, probably about this high if you look at pictures, and you can get up under it and get some shade. It's called a broom tree. And he sat down under it and prayed that he might die. And here's what he said, I have had enough, Lord. You ever prayed a prayer like that? I've had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. Now, prior chapter and chapters, you see in Elijah's life that God's word is what directed him and sustained him. And he was surrendered to that. But here we see him praying, not for rain and fire to come down, but he's praying for God to take his life. We know him as a powerful prayer who prayed for fire to come from heaven and consume the sacrifice, and it consumed the sacrifice, the idol, the altar and the water and the whole deal after they doused it 3 times. He prayed that it would not rain, and it did not rain. He was known as a man of mighty prayer. But what kind of prayer is this? One to die. But he's not the first person to despair of life in the Bible, and he probably won't be the last. You may be despairing of life and pray to God, God, I'm just done. I have no reason to live. That's the prayer of Elijah. But it would be the prayer of Moses too. He told God, kill me at once in Numbers 11:15. Job wished that he had never been born. Job 10. Jeremiah cursed the day of his birth. Jeremiah 20. And Jonah asked God to take away his life because death was better than life. And Jonah 4:3. Men have often longed in their state of placing something else above God that they just give up. But you don't have to go to a desert and flop down under a broom tree to give up. I remember when I first started pastoring, my very first pastorate in Virginia, you've probably heard me tell this story, but I had 3 deacons. They all wanted to go 3 different directions in the church, and I literally didn't know what to do about it. I got up in our guest room. Michelle will tell you the story. And I held up in there, I don't know how many days and hours, in deep depression, not knowing what to do. I made myself sick physically. I got shingles as a young man, came all around my waist, and and it was just stress. It was just focusing on Jezebel's letter. In essence, Satan was using that to disable me because I wasn't trusting God. Anyway, here we go. Now y'all can hear me. I was in that room, in the parsonage, guest room, upstairs, in room, and I crawled in that bed. I got under those covers, and I just despaired, not knowing what to do. And Michelle said, God, I don't know what to do with him. And she didn't. But God knew what he was doing in my life. And I tell the story, I love all 3 of those men. I don't know where they are today, if they're still with us or they've passed on or what. But it really wasn't about them. It was about me trusting God. But God left a scar. I have a scar right here on my leg, inside part. I have 3 spots where the shingles left a scar. And it's my reminder to trust God every time I see those. But depression's a real thing. Let me just tell you something. We were growing. We were seeing people come to Christ. We were seeing the church expand in number and influence. And these 3 men, they all thought, well, this is the way we should go. And they all had 3 different ways. And then I felt like I had a way. And so we had a north, a south, a east, and a west. And we weren't getting anywhere because nobody knew where to go. But yet God was moving. See, there was spiritual victory and there was a spiritual battle going on at the same time. And I had to learn to trust God in that. And I was young, immature, but God was growing me to trust him. And that's how it is. I didn't have a broom tree, but I had a bedroom. I had a dark room, and I was in despair. And I was losing connection with reality, just like Elijah. I didn't have a voice of accountability or encouragement or love except for my wife, who came in and said, Mark, I'm praying for you. Elijah didn't have anyone. He's just out under the broom tree in the middle of the desert, completely separated from all those who could have encouraged him, his servant, others. And if you go back and you study his life, what you'll see is this. Even when he took on the prophets of Baal, he said this in that chapter, and he says it here to God again. He says, I am the only one. He literally thought there were none others. There's no one else serving God. And sometimes we feel that way.
And if you start feeling that way, and then you box God out, and you leave every accountability and encouragement and people out as well, then you begin to believe what you're saying yourself. I'm the only one. I can't do this. I'm done. And it's those just constant flooding of those ideas that Satan loves. He loves it when you rehearse Jezebel's letter that your life is about to end and you just give up. Don't do it. This self-erected shelter separation was leading to his demise. Now, Elijah will not take his life, but he wanted to die, and he expressed that to God. Elijah was done and said to God, I have had enough, Lord. Elijah gave up and he went to sleep praying that God would take his life. He truly was depressed, defeated, and he was in a horrible situation. Now, I think it's normal to want to give up, spiritually speaking. You just can't, though. The feeling may be there, but you've got to turn to the facts over the feelings. Because if you let your feelings rule your life and you don't let God be God to you, you're going to be in a terrible state, a state of defeat. And you will not begin to see God clearly as God sees you. And so he prays a prayer of defeat. God, I'm done. I'm not worthy of this. Take my life. And he goes to sleep under a broom tree. Now, I would simply say this, is that when I face some of my biggest discouragements in life, I can go back and I can look and see that I, like Elijah, I may not have been in the desert, I may not have been under a broom tree, but the bottom line is this, I took my eyes off God. And I put them on whatever the threat was that Satan was using to create fear within me. God is bigger than any concern that I have. And that's the concluding point of where I have to be and where you have to be. Don't leave out the God factor. What God is doing, what God can do and will do. I've always been taught, my dad taught me this. He said, Mark, he said, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. If you stop and you really think about that, it's true. If you'll stop and be honest with whatever your problem is, you won't rationalize it, you won't put it off on somebody else, you won't blame somebody else, but you'll say, you know what? Okay, I got a problem here. And the reason I have this problem is because I've gotten up in fear or whatever it may be. The first thing you must do is you've got to be honest with what's going on in your heart and your mind. Then you can overcome. Then you can trust God. I wonder, what stage are you in? What stage are you in? Are you doing great? You're having a Mount Carmel experience. God's moving. Everything's great. Be careful, because the spiritual battle may unleash in your life. You may get a letter from Jezebel. Or is that where you are? You've gotten the letter from Jezebel. No, it may not, it's not Jezebel, but you know what I mean. It's somebody close to you that says, hey, you're not worthy. Hey, I'm mad at you. Hey, you know. What is it? What is it that's got you in fear? What is it? You gotta answer that. And then you gotta answer, what is this fear? When it said of Elijah, it said he ran because he was fearful. And so maybe you've gotten the letter. Maybe you've entered into fear. And then maybe you're at the stage where you're running from God. And you're running from your fear instead of trusting it to God. Or maybe you've even gone even further and you now begin to separate yourself intentionally from everything that is associated with God, even your servant. And you're intentionally headed as far away from God as you can, and you're headed into the desert. And your whole intent is to find a broom tree. Maybe you're at that point today. You're under the broom tree. You've already found it. And you've already prayed to God. You've given up. And you're just ready to die. Which stage are you in? You say, well, I am that broom tree situation right there. See, it's too late for me. No, it's not. What we're going to see in the weeks ahead is God intervened out of his love for Elijah. He's going to show Elijah some things that are incredible. God's waiting to show you something incredible. If you'll just become honest about your fear and whatever it is that you've placed above God. Don't live in fear. God, we are to live in God's love, not fear. You want to talk about fear? You want to talk about anxiety? You want to talk about depression? I will tell you this. Those are spiritual problems. I'm not saying we all face fears. We all face emotional things that try to control us. But for the believer, it comes back to a spiritual problem of not trusting God in full surrender. Now, I say that out of my own personal experience because that's what I've had to learn to do. And that's what God has called me to do. And I believe that's what he calls every one of us to do. I want to ask you, if you would, to bow your heads and close your eyes.